Heavy fighting for Bakhmut continues between the Ukrainian and Russian armies. The Russians claim to have entered the industrial zone on the outskirts of the city, but the Ukrainian Armed Forces immediately began to drive them out. Our journalist investigated whether the enemy is able to encircle Bakhmut in the coming days and whether the bloody fighting in this area will hinder the Ukrainian Armed Forces preparations for the spring counteroffensive.
The roar of explosions and the whistle of the wind break the silence of the ruined Bakhmut. Will the Ukrainian military be able to hold the city? This is the main question of the last few days. The Russians are attacking from three directions: north, east and south. The mercenaries of the Wagner group have managed to enter the industrial zone of the northern outskirts of Bakhmut, and the Ukrainian armed forces are trying to drive them out.
We are trying to storm their positions. God willing, we will succeed. I want you to understand the scale of this tragedy. These are factories, industrial zones. Everything has been destroyed.
Over the past week alone, the Russians have lost more than 2,500 soldiers killed and wounded near Bakhmut. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky said, "The Supreme Commander-in-Chief's staff, which met this week, has once again decided to continue the defense of the city."
There is a clear position of the entire staff to strengthen this direction, to destroy the occupiers to the maximum.
At the same time, Zelensky is often criticized in the West for his uncompromising determination to continue the fight for Bakhmut, even despite the threat of encirclement. Skeptics say that the losses incurred by the Ukrainian army in the Bakhmut sector could jeopardize preparations for a spring counteroffensive.
The ratio of losses between ours and the enemy's forces is now said to be 1:5, which is quite optimal in terms of bleeding the enemy. If such losses continue to decrease to a ratio 1:1, then I think a decision will be made to withdraw. But it is difficult to predict this precisely because both the political leadership of Ukraine and the military one are determined to hold Bakhmut. Because if we withdraw from Bakhmut, the risks do not disappear, the Russian troops do not disappear, and this will mean that other frontiers may face the same risk as Bakhmut does today, in particular the Slovyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration, which is located behind Bakhmut.
Serhiy Zgurets is convinced that the beginning and success of the Ukrainian counteroffensive depends on the supply of Western weapons, not on the situation in Bakhmut. Military expert Roman Svitan shares the same opinion.
Ukrainian troops are definitely preparing for an offensive that will begin no earlier than in a month, when weather conditions are more or less favorable and equipment arrives, and Bakhmut has no impact on preparations for the counteroffensive. The situation there is very difficult for our military, but we are not talking about any operational encirclement. Bakhmut is fulfilling its task of holding the Donetsk front line. If we withdraw from the city, the entire front in this area will fall. Our military must hold out until about mid-April, because when the counteroffensive begins, the Russians will no longer have time for Bakhmut, and they will have to move forces and equipment to the breakthrough areas.
The Russian military machine is increasingly experiencing shortages and has almost tripled its consumption of shells at the front, the Wall Street Journal writes. However, Ukraine's stockpile is still almost 3 times smaller than the enemy's one, and this gap must be reduced for an effective counteroffensive, the journalists emphasize. For the first time since independence, our country has launched its own ammunition production. The other day, Ukroboronprom announced that together with a NATO member state, it had launched the production of 5 types of mortar shells, artillery rounds and tank shells.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Latest news, trends, and analytics on all about Ukraine. Like, share, and subscribe. Any questions, proposals, and comments? Contact us via email.